Based on what I've seen over the COVID pandemic, I believe that we do have a major issue with industry. And the fact that finance is too much of a priority almost in the context of how people's health is managed. And I understand that there are challenges for the pharmaceutical industry because it is so expensive to do research. When we think that it's millions of dollars to do a drug, and when you look at drug pipelines, maybe one in 100 can make it through. So they invest millions, sometimes billions in research and development, only to have one big drug come through. And when that big drug comes through, they have to make as much money off it as they can. That's the essence of what is happening in industry. And I suspect that there are reasons why this is the case. Maybe there is almost too much regulation. Maybe there is a lot of problems in the background with the way how research is structured. But it comes at a cost, I think, to patients. And by the end of this video, you'll understand what I'm talking about in the context of the industry. But I'm also here to highlight a very important documentary that had recently come out. I don't think a lot of people have heard about it because I think it is being suppressed. And it's with Dr. Malhotra. He's a cardiologist in the UK. And this documentary is about First Do No Farm. And this is technically what the highlight is about, or the name of this is about, is really to give awareness to this work that they have been doing. And I think that we have to recognize, yes, that there are and there are issues in industry that need to be addressed. What I'll be doing in the next week or so, and so this is very important in that same context, is I'm taking on the ugly truth about long term immunity from the mRNA vaccines. And the registration link is in the description. So please join me as I take apart what is a really, really important piece of research. And the implications of it are actually quite significant with regards to what happens going forward. I've said it before that I think public health really has to go back to the drawing board and reflect carefully on where we are now, because if there is no long term immunity, what is it called? I did a survey on LinkedIn, and it was a small survey, probably just about 200 people, but 88% thought that they should reclassify these shots because you can't consider it well, I can't even say that now because of censorship, but essentially, how can it be what you say it is if it doesn't trigger long-term immunity? That really is the question. I'll be dealing with that and why I think that this has been such a major issue going forward. Um, One of the things that I think that we have to concentrate our minds on is also the fact that in COVID, and this is what I'll share with you, I'd shared it before with regards to what I call the steroid conspiracy. We need to have different mechanisms to protect patients. I'm just going to play a short clip from this First Do No Farm. This is about a minute and a half long. This is the promotion for this video. Here it goes.
Between 2003 and 2016, fines imposed on large pharmaceutical companies for fraud and other illegal activities amounted to $33 billion.
You have to do something. We are considered acceptable collateral damage.
We're talking about many millions of people killed by research fraud in medical science.
Between 40 and 60,000 Americans died. So this is like approximately equal to the number of Americans who died in the Vietnam War, died from taking Vioxx.
We need to apply quite a big dose of skepticism to the medical literature. They know they might get $1 million, for example, for publishing the trial. And that, I don't really see how you can manage that as a conflict of interest.
You are going to be obliterated if you take on this position.
I effectively lost my job. The thing you care about is, I don't want to lose my memory. I want to be able to do the things I normally do in life. That's what Alzheimer's robs you of.
The FDA is not going to protect doctors and the public and the insurers and Medicare from this deception about the clinical value of this drug.
If you knew, why didn't you do anything?
Patient began to verbalize feelings of killing other people, and then himself.
They are now out of control as an entity that is purely there to make money. A psychopathic entity.
Powerful stuff. And yes, I think that it's worth. I haven't watched this documentary yet, so I can't promote it from the perspective of saying this is great. I just know it's important for us to reflect on it. So you just have to type it into Google and you'll find the link for it. But it's a really important point that we need to reflect carefully on where we are at the moment, because I think that we have some very, very difficult challenges ahead that need to be addressed. One of the things that I recently dealt with, and I think I want to share with you this post, this was on LinkedIn here, and it was making reference to the fact that this was done by Robert Lufkin, and Professor Fred Stair, who was then the chair of Harvard School of Public Health in 1967, was then leading the direction that the only dietary intervention required to prevent coronary heart disease was to reduce cholesterol. And the problem with this was that he was being secretly paid large amounts of money by a sugar trade group, which he didn't disclose, in order to shift the blame from heart disease from sugar to fat. And this is when he was able to say things like he was promoting Coca-Cola. And this was only brought to light in 2016. And so we talking about almost 50 years of damage that was done to industry at that time. So very, very important points that we can go historically and know that this was very, very significant. Now, I'll soon be talking about the importance of statins. So it's not that statins aren't important, but they're probably not as important for what you think they are about cholesterol. It's going to be more about the anti-inflammatory capabilities that they have, and that's important to understand as well. But in the COVID pandemic itself, as I had mentioned to you before, the way that it was handled with regards to the vaccine rollout and the science around it, that really is going to go down in history as a remarkable period of time as to how that occurred. What also struck me as being very, very important was what I call the steroid conspiracy. I'll not go through the full presentation on it, but I'd done this some time ago. And really, it is talking about what happened in the pandemic. And I was highlighting at the time that dexamethasone, this was in June 2020, when it came through, was found to be significantly beneficial in people with severe COVID. And this piece of research was shot out by Oxford and immediately changed management across the world. And they're part of the group of drugs called steroids, anti-inflammatory medication, and it was considered a breakthrough treatment at the time. Now, what had concerned me was the fact that steroids, when we were using them, because I was looking at autoimmunity, it made perfect sense. The question was the dosage and the formulation. And when we looked at the data at the time, this was taken from their paper. They estimated that using dexamethasone saved 1 million lives globally by March 2021. That was before vaccines came out. So dexamethasone was crucial. So you'd be thinking to yourself, well, why is that a conspiracy in my mind? Well, it's because they didn't do the next step. And that was really the question that I had here. You know, they used dexamethasone. Why didn't they take the next logical step? And this was the point, is that dexamethasone is equivalent to about 40 milligrams of prednisone, 160 milligrams of hydrocortisone, 32 milligrams of methylprednisolone. These are all steroids that we use in different contexts. Now, in terms of lung penetration, we tend to use prednisone and hydrocortisone in preference to dexamethasone. Dexamethasone, because it crosses the blood-brain barrier, can sometimes cause more side effects, and it's very beneficial when you have patients who say have a brain tumor. So it's a very good steroid, but it's not what we use in normal circumstances. But the steroid conspiracy, in my view, and this is where the industry in it, I can only think that industry was involved in this kind of decision, because the next logical step after finding that dexamethasone was beneficial, 6 milligrams, was to work out, well, what formulation, what happens if we use prednisolone or hydrocortisone, and did we get the dosage right? Suppose instead of 6 milligrams, we use 20 milligrams, so a higher dose regime. And that should have happened immediately. Literally, the next day, that should have been added to the arm in June 2020. They did not do that research until we got the results in 2022. And so I knew at that point that the research should have been done, but it wasn't done at the right time. So by that time, we'd already gone through a lot of the pandemic. People had been exposed already, people were vaccinated. And so when they did that research study, it didn't show much benefit. And I'm thinking to myself, that, in my view, doesn't add up, that it wasn't properly done at that time. That's the kind of thing that I would consider to be that kind of conspiracy in a sense. So as I said, it was December 2021 that they decided that they were going to use higher doses of dexamethasone to see if it helps with severe COVID-19. And what that means is that if you go back to the time, you just have to think about it. The options are: one, they didn't do the higher dose in June because they didn't think about it. I think that's unlikely, because they clearly thought about it, because they did it afterwards. Two, they couldn't be bothered. But these are good high level scientists, and these scientists were focused on finding solutions, and they were willing to step outside the box. So that doesn't fit. The third option is that they were asked not to do it. And the reason they would have been asked not to do it is because there was development of vaccines. You don't want a treatment if you're bringing vaccines. Now, that's where I think that the industry, if it had to be involved in that decision, that caused harm to the population, because millions of lives, even more lives, could have been saved if they had done the research immediately, found that higher doses of steroids were beneficial. So instead of giving 6, maybe they gave 10 or 15 milligrams at the start, and you started it early as soon as people started having symptoms. It's that kind of thing that could have happened, because you have to remember, this is not theoretical, because when we look at the outcomes of using higher dose steroids along with antihistamines, guess who we have here? Dr. Shetty. And you'd never believe that Dr. Shetty is being targeted for doing this. None of his patients died. You know, he was in semi-rural South Africa, yet I think it's now up to about 18,000 patients that he has managed with COVID, just using simple strategies, higher dose steroids with antihistamines. And the medical community doesn't accept that it works. This is why he's under problems, but they've never done any proper research into exactly what he has done. So it raises the question as to why was appropriate research not done at the time. That, in my view, represents that issue with regards to intervention from the pharmaceutical industry. This is really what we have to fix at this time. And the hope, therefore, is that as we go forward, it's not that we want to stop them from making money, because if they've come up with a good drug, needs to make money. I'll deal at some point soon with what's happening with Ozempic, a good drug, but people are trying to make too much money off it and therefore putting the public in harm's way. And that needs to be dealt with in a different setting. That is a very important webinar that I intend to do that will explain what is relevant and why it's so important for people to think carefully about it before they jump on that bandwagon. So as the final point here, just remember, coming up is this webinar, The Ugly Truth, about poor long-term immunity. What does it mean? Why is it occurring? I touched on it recently, but I think this is so important that I'll need to do it again. So as usual, let us remember that we are all trying to find solutions to make a better healthcare world and try and produce ways that we make each other better. Let's continue to talk as we find solutions for the future. Have a great evening.